the Kensariwa Prize for Book Review this year, LABAF, with a grand prize of 250,000. This is a great man in making. If you look at him, you already see Wole Soyinka second. So we're expecting that. All right. So on this panel, I have another beautiful lady in the house who is going to, Nigeria says the world is not complete without the woman. And this is not the stage for the men. It is the stage to discuss this powerful book. Join me as I welcome Olatokun Oyindamola. Olatokun Oyindamola. I think he's somewhere he's going to be joining us. Olatokun Oyindamola. Okay. All right. So I'll hand over the microphone to the moderator while Olatokun joins us. Thank you, sir.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I guess it's because I don't want the festival to end. This is the second to the last of the plenary session. Oyinda, you can join us, please. We don't want it to look like we're very disorganized. We should have one more person here. And Professor Adesokan himself is joining us on Zoom. So we'll have an opportunity to ask him some of the things that we would like to ask him. But so what is this novel about? This is it's his second published novel in 21 years, and it's a very vast landscape that it transpires. So this is an author who, in my view, lives from residency to residency. And he has to get that residency in order to have some kind of a fulfilled life, because essentially there's no home to go to. I don't know that Adesokan makes that, even though we all agree that there's a sense of rootlessness in this, but it's also a very exciting life. It's not something that automatically is a bad thing like that, I saw Oyinda's review, and Oyinda's review was trying to say that no country wants him. That's not the way it's portrayed in my own view. I actually would like to be an Abel Donko, and I wish that all of you read this book. This is a fairly fulfilled writer. Somebody who lives the right of a writer on his own terms. Most writers that I know of in Nigeria, have to be geologists in the daytime, or mining gold in the daytime, and writing just has to be something else, right? They have to mine the gold so that they can print their collections of poems and distribute it free, because they are not sure that people will buy them, so that's how it is here. But this is a writer who is, followed by his own publishers, who want to engage him one way or the other. All right, so now, because I'm just moderating, I'd rather that we see this book from the perspectives of the discussants, the people who were actually asked to read the book and review them. What I've done is just a sketch of his life. And so, Kehinde, you want to start by sketching for us, the overall, summary in 2 minutes. What you find from the book and what stands out for you. And I have noticed for the last 6 days that we've been having this festival that, except for 1 or 2 or 3 sessions, we will review a book and nobody is reading from that text. We're supposed to be in a book reading mode. We're supposed to be excited by the idea of a book. And so if if we, as a matter of fact, if we're, I don't want to use the word lament. I mean, if we basically have a very strong concern about certain things that the writer is doing, we go to that spot, right, where we think where the primacy of that concern is addressed, and we read that part, So if you have in these 2 to 3 minutes that you're going to do, if there's any part that you feel strongly about, please read it out, Let's do that, and then we'll get to Mr. Olatokun here. But let's start from you, yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Mr. Akin. The honor is mine to be part of the discussion of this great book, because in the reading of these texts, I discovered that the writer has captured to a certain extent the complexity of identity. That generally, identity issue is a relevant narrative landscape, whether in literature or in real life. It therefore means that the evolution of the novel, the African novel, in terms of the writer's nativity, that evolution has taken a new shape of contemporariness in this text. One would imagine a contemporary novel will address matters of the city life, urbanization, the life of the common people. But this novel addresses, it uses the same style of a complex network of humanity that you have in the works of pioneer African writers like Ngugi, Soyinka, Achebe. So this work is, to me, a kind of reincarnation of that ingenuity among African writers. And so that serves as something so awesome that stands out for me. And I also discovered in the process of reading that while those pioneer writers in their own view, they captured ideological conquest, this one captures ideological displacement, right, generally. So I will leave it at that so that I don't speak. A kind of plot. So for the plot, we have Abel Dankor, the writer. So for the plot, we have Abel Dankor, a writer, a prolific writer, who is very much fascinated by the life and brilliance of Sir Koroma, who happens to be his mentor or someone he aspires to be like. And he has an ambition. He's a fulfilled writer, but he still believes that there is something he needs to capture about his origin. Just like the line of one particular poem that says, "Origin troubles the voyager much. Those feet that have sapped continents." So so the issue of origin. He wants to know about his origin because he was born at sea. So there is the issue of displacement, and that issue of displacement is like a motif. He encounters characters who, in their minority, are plagued by the inequality, the social inequality they find themselves in. So Abel Dankor is trying to link his origin to his identity, what it means to be an African, the issue of minority, what it means to be an insider, what it means to be an outsider. So throughout the text, we see Abel Dankor interacting with characters who have issues of minority. Then he goes to Australia, different parts of the world. And at the end of the day, he settles for love, and he comes to terms with his identity, that anywhere can be home, that the question of minority is but a description of some people, that your perception of yourself is what matters most.
Kehinde takes it from Kehinde takes this novel from the point of view of somebody who is trying to reach out as, you know, somebody who comes from a not so, I mean, a place on the margins of the globe. I mean, you know that your own people are not, I mean, number one, you don't even have a sense of place, you know. But the excursion that he has, I mean, the what you might call the movable feast that we find this novel to be, is that of highlighting, you know, people who he considers also displaced like himself. So there's a particular place in Portugal where you find Ugandans, you know, of, you know, Indian origin, you know. There's a particular, you know, I tend to prefer using examples because that sort of illuminates. He gets down in a car, from a car in the middle of nowhere in maybe Netherlands or something, and one person he sees is a black man, you know. It's supposed to be a very white neighborhood, and it's in Europe, you know. And that person is putting flyers on windscreens, and this is around, say, the late 80s, you know, and that happens to be a South African guy who said he's organizing some kind of a drama, you know, essentially, you know, propagating, you know, black South African music and culture, right, you know, in Netherlands, you know, or Denmark or somewhere like that. He meets a you know, lady who is married to an Australian white man, but who herself is black, you know, who is trying to connect with African Americans, you know. So there's a whole lot of this whole idea that, you know, Africa is in several places, you know, and that this is a feast of of connection. I wish I could tell it the way I mean, I could summarize it more properly. But let's get a sense of the summary again, because I can see that I'm not summarizing well. And I want people, you know, who will not read the novel at all to get that sense. So what's your take? Maybe you're a better storyteller.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So to begin with, Southside is not an easy read. So Southside is not a book you read in a hurry, or maybe you're on the move and then you're just like, oh, I have a book, let me read. You have to actually take your time to read and understand, right? So the book centers on Abel Danko, who is a writer, and he was born on sea because his family had to move from one place to another. And that's one thing that keeps popping up in the story, where Abel has to move from one place to another. He has to move to Australia, has to move to Mende, and all of those things. And while moving from one place to another, all he's just trying to seek is a place to call home, right? And we cannot overemphasize that. You know, home to, like I was saying yesterday, home to people might mean different things. Home might be a person, it might be a set of people, it might be a place. It might be something that you love doing. And for Abel, the only place he could find his home was in his writing. So he wished to be a citizen of a place because he had to move from one place to another. So he was more like he was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. So he had plans to go back to Mende, where he was from, to claim citizenship through Sir Koroma, who was his mentor. But then he got a news that his mentor had died, so that alone destabilized him and he just lost it. Then he also has a best friend, Yakubu, who was vying for a political position, who was also supposed to help him. Maybe when he finds his way back, he can actually claim that, oh, he's a native of this place because he has maybe a friend in a political position and all of that. So all he wanted to do was to find a place called home. And one thing that also helped him was love, because he met different women, yes, and he had time with different women. The one that struck worst was, I'm trying to remember her name now. He was with her for about 6 years. He was able to, sorry? Yes, Gilo, until Gilo eventually died, and then he had to even give up on love again. So basically, this book is for someone who is trying as much as possible to find a place called home, to find an identity. And it also says that we can actually be free. We can actually find home in something that we love, in our creativity, in our art, in our books, in our writing. You can actually find home in those places. So it doesn't have to be boxed in a geographical area. Your home doesn't have to be in a certain place. It doesn't have to be Iyanokpaja. It can be anywhere in the world. Your home can be in your mind. So if you do not have a place you can physically call your home, then you can have a home in your imagination. Basically, that's just what the book is about.
Thank you very much. You can clap for her. I think she clarifies this better than both of us. Now, let's invite the author just to say hello and, give us some kind of sense of what he was looking for. And so can we Zoom Professor Adesokan in? Can we get him? Is he online?
Yeah, I am.
All right. Oyinda here has alleged that, Abel Donko was a homeless character and, would have ended up, on the streets of Iyanokpaja. But that's not the kind of character that's portrayed here. I mean, it looks to me like, despite all of those wanderings and challenges, he seemed to have a very fulfilled writing career. What exactly was, if you take away the whole Bantu thing, what exactly is Donko's contribution in a sense to the African worldview in this book? What's your, in a nutshell?
Well, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes.
I'm not always sure that I'm being heard, but I just want to be sure, but I can't hear you. So thank you for the panelists for this take on the novel. I agree, it's not an easy book to read. It's actually, it's not too long, but at the same time, it's not plotted. Maybe that's what Oyinda was trying to say. It's not like a drama, it's not a drama, but it's more of an account of a life. Maybe not a biographical account, but, episodic, and the idea is to actually highlight those aspects of his life that are decisive in how he comes to a sense of who he is or who he's about to be. So essentially, the idea is, we know the narrator or the protagonist, if you want, is from a minority ethnic group in today's Somalia called the Bantu. They are still there. But the essential idea is to use the life of a writer. Even the very idea of creativity, being a writer, being an artist, as a kind of home. That irrespective of where you come from, if you, as I was trying to say yesterday during the panel, I believe the second one, or maybe the first one, in any case, the idea is that if you approach the artistic endeavor with as a genuine vocation, as something that you want to commit your life to, not for any kind of pecuniary gain, which is not to say that that's not important. It's important. But if you are good at it, especially if you are good at it, if you have the talent to pursue a particular kind of vocation, especially in the artistic realm, that in itself is enough identity, is enough sense of oneself. I mean, we say that Ngugi is a Kenyan writer, right? James Ngugi, Ngugi wa Thiong'o passed away last year, earlier this year, is a Kenyan writer. We know that from him. But we also know that for perhaps the last 40 years of his life, he lived outside of Kenya. He was an exile. He lived everywhere else. The same thing, I mean, Wole Soyinka was in exile at 3 different phases of his life. He, of course, lived mostly in Nigeria. But I guess that what I'm trying to say is that for a writer, is a writer's life or an artist's life is actually the sum of the work that is the sum of work that they've done. Their nationality, their sense of home is important, but the identity is constituted, that's what I'm trying to suggest in this novel, by the sum of work that you do. That he never has a country. He's lived for 9 years in Mande. He lived in Germany, in Italy, in UK, that's where he went to school, and he started working there. He lived in Portugal, he lived all over the place. But those homes are not home for him, and he never actually succeeded in getting one. Maybe towards the end he will, that's how the novel ends. But the important thing was that at the same time, he was very productive. Maybe that's what the moderator means by saying that he was having a ball, so to speak. He was very productive. He wrote 5 novels at the age of 34. So the very idea, and this is actually common to some writers too. I mean, I can give you the idea. I mean, now that I'm thinking about it, the writer Nuruddin Farah, who is from Somalia, also incidentally, for a long time was not living in Somalia. And as a matter of fact, I never thought about Nuruddin Farah until now in relation to this. I mean, the author is from Somalia. He's a novelist, and Nuruddin Farah was also footloose. At some point, he was teaching at the University of Jos. He was living in South Africa, and so that's an example. That Nuruddin, I don't even think he ever lived for any period of time in Somalia. But I mean, maybe now he's currently in Minnesota or someplace like that. You see him all over the world for a very long time. But Nuruddin Farah was close to, I mean, he might still get the Nobel Prize. I mean, he was always constantly mentioned with Ngugi wa Thiong'o. So that's it. He doesn't, I mean, he has Somalia nationality, but he never really claimed it, never lived it. On the other hand, the sum of his work is there. He's written maybe about 13 or 14 novels, and they're all, gold standard work. So that's the sense I'm trying to suggest about this author, that it is not so much the country that you come from, but that the work that you produce, the art that you make, that really constitutes your identity.
Okay, so when let me quickly, before, I mean, we will let you go, not that you go away, I mean, because this conversation will help, but I wanted to ask you, when you say productive, I wanted to tell you that I'd already, I mean, in my introduction, I was trying to tell the audience that it wasn't just about you being productive. It's also that his books must also be bringing in some returns, because the editor was always around. His publishers were always after him. That gives me the sense that this is not that's not a normal African writer, right? Can you speak to that? Abel could almost be someone that you can't find in a regular, if he wasn't fiction, he really almost isn't real. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, he wrote books, and he says very early that he really didn't care about the whole idea of, okay, am I getting reviews? But of course, it's business for his publishers. He was lucky very early to find a publisher, and that he stayed with that publisher for the duration of the novel. And they will give him, and because of this is business for them, the book managed to sell for him, and so he will be getting his money. And sometimes he will ask for an advance, because after he published his first novel, or just before he published his first novel, he got a job as a teacher. And he was teaching in a high school. And then even when he returned to Monday, he got a job, and so he had some kind of income. But essentially, he was getting, when he realized I didn't probably, and the moment when he needs to maybe make big purchase like travel, he will ask for an advance because he's also very productive. Very importantly, he's a very disciplined writer. Like, he was one of those writers who could write every day. I mean, I cannot, but when he sees that, and he goes to writing as if he's going to work. Like, he will sit down very early in the morning, in spite of everything, the world may be collapsing, but he will write. And because he was very productive, and also, I won't say prolific, but very productive, and could turn things in, and was very reliable, people actually, will give him his money. And he's also he's very hard-nosed. I won't say he's money conscious, but he knows how to make sure that he does not go broke. That's actually something that I consciously, because I know people like that. Maybe they are not writers, but I know people who know how to put their finances together and make sure, because, not having a country already and not depending on anyone also makes him able to take care of himself, in the sense that, look, and money is everything. Money is a thing.
Yeah.
If you don't have money in any situation, you're screwed, and he really isn't the kind of person who wants to be screwed. So that is actually what I think makes it possible for him to live as a writer.
Okay.
And the fellowships, of course, are there, the residencies are there, but actually, until he needed those things, he will not often want to go for them. He will say that whenever he can, he would like to keep a job.
Okay.
And do that job 9 to 5, and other days sit down and write.
Okay, thank you very much, Akin. Let me get back to, you were trying to pick out something to read, right? Because I threw a challenge. But do you have?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Very short.
Very short.
Just to give you a sense of, you have anywhere to, no, you don't want. You don't have it. This is a copy. But do you know where you want to read from there?
So I mentioned displacement and the fact that Abel Danko has lived in several places, and as a writer, he has a sense of duty. He feels so obligated to exonerate himself and his people from the quote-unquote, the crime of minority. The text still opens a fresh perspective on what we think of imperialism. What we think of imperialism with respect to what is going on between history and literature. And that brings us to the new historicism about the text. How that history alone is not enough to account for all that has happened to a people. We also need to investigate their condition from their culture, from their politics. And so when Sir Koroma begins to school him, he gets to know more about the idea of origin, that it is all about perception. Now, let me read from page 235. Not in every... No, okay, from page 235 to 236. Yeah, it's a paragraph, just a paragraph, yes. Not in every case, but let us speak of what we know. Even when the white rulers were not deepening ethnic divisions out of self-interest, they thought of the tribe as a feature of a particular country. This was because it was not their objective to change divisions into something useful for that country. Instead, they saw a perceived division as a good argument for the policy of white rule, which was to introduce self-rule only when the people were sufficiently unified to act as an undivided group. We all know, of course, that divisions, dissensions are natural in human relations, politics included. So that establishes the fact that our perception of imperialism, colonialism, the issue of history, intrusion, enslavement of a people, where you have it even in Australia, and when the story mentioned, when it mentions Australia, the moment I saw Australia, I messaged Dr. Eyo Etim of Akwa Ibom State University, because he has written something about minority, and I also remembered what Selchini Koka, writes in Breast of the Sea, where he says, even those shot out of Australia, throbbing, the sea's breast will console some orphans, but Sierra Leone won't be worth a raped woman's cry, etc. So that tells us that, yeah, that's a point. So that tells us that the issue of minority in this text, the issue of displacement, is not to be taken entirely as a work of European invasion. That there is something about the politics, the culture, the nativity of the people themselves that offer history and their culture.
You're saying that there are incidents of Africans against Africans.
Yes,
and
it's
not always about the other. What's your take? You want to read something and you want to explain? Yeah.
Okay, so while reading, there was this part that got me, and it also centers on the identity theme that we're talking about. So in here, there's a lady, Flavor, who is trying to introduce the author, Abel, to a filmmaker. So she says, this is Gianfranco, she said, a filmmaker. We call him our darling pink neuralist because, then she paused, are you familiar with Italian films? I nodded. A few months earlier, I had seen the film of De Sica and Fellini at my university. So sorry, I'm reading from page 111. Then she said, it continues, good. Then you know what we call Neuralissimo. Gianfranco is different because he is new film. In his new film, he gives Neuralissimo an attractive dress by using star actors and filming in color. Pink, the color of California. Then she said, Gianfranco, this is Abel, the young writer from nowhere in Africa. That introduction for me was like a knockoff. Okay, so even if you don't know where exactly he's from, how would you introduce someone to another person for the first time and say, this is this person from nowhere in Africa? So I think this is one of the moments when Abel is like, no, things cannot go on like this. They need to know me, and I need to have a place of my own. So this statement was somewhat hurtful for me because, I don't know, I found it somehow, right? So this could also be part of the reason why he needed to actually find a place that he can say, oh, I am this, I am from here, I am, this is who I am. So this was one of the reasons why he had to actually find that identity, right? Find purpose to his life. Aside being a writer, he was a very great writer. He was good with what he was doing, but he still needed a place. He needed a place to call his home. He needed some people to be his own people. He needed to have people that I can look back and say, oh, these are my people because we speak the same language, we have the same skin, we have the same ideology, and that is a good one, right? So that's what I have to read from this book, and that's what I wanted to share.
You know, this is a book that feels like an onion. When you strip this, you meet the next one. It never ends, the kind of information that you get. And I think, for me, I mean, from what the two of them said, even though they're interpreting, they have different interpretations. For me, it's a way of seeing the world, seeing the African world from different perspectives. For example, the scene that Oyinda quotes, I mean, takes you, I think that's probably around 1974, you know, because you have to read this book. It's a period piece, and there's a whole lot of flashback that you have to do and ask yourself, where is this place at that point in time? So if you say, you know, I mean, that's room, I think it was breakfast, right? Somewhere in a villa, a residency villa in Italy. And She's talking about neorealismo. When you take that to be English, it means neorealism, apparently. So that's a filmmaker who is working in a neorealist, aspect of filmmaking, right? But what essentially Akin has done is to show us the idea of when the Italians started to make neorealist movies, that sort of thing. When it began to appeal to them, you get a place where he would introduce an African American diplomat who then drives him to somewhere in the U.S. and says, well, this is where W.E. Du Bois did so and so, and this is the theory that. So you get a sense of touring the world, from an African perspective, or an African American, or an Australian black, or he wants to show us the different things that people are doing in different places. That's why he will show us inside Denmark at 7 p.m. in 1989, when apartheid was still strong in South Africa, showing that some South Africans are trying to do, do you see that? When I read, sometimes I read this book, it feels to me like an exhibition, a grand art exhibition, of African place in the world. Do you get that sense? Is that something you want? Let me read something. I don't know whether it fits it, but this is something that I put in the conversation that I had with the author himself. At the dining table, I found myself sitting opposite this man with sharp blue eyes and a well-trimmed mustache. He did not talk much at first, and that sparked my interest. Then, without warning or pretext, he launched into a lecture about an educational program in South Africa in which he had been personally involved. I sat up and listened. Here was a prominent member of parliament in a white minority-ruled Rhodesia, holding forth on the value of special education for black people in South Africa. I couldn't get this much information from years of reading the Hansards in Salisbury, listening to the man dog. I wondered to myself, what is Jean doing among this sort of people? Now, so that line is basically to tell us how the white Rhodesians introduced the concept of Bantu education, in South African schools for black people. By the time you finish the book, you have, information a lot about your own people, about Africans in different places, what their struggles being, For example, the group of Indians who are talking about Idi Amin's period, they were talking about how black people were very excited when Idi Amin said that all of Indians should leave, but they were talking, so it was giving us a sense of what their own experience was, how they felt, Most of us in Africa, we can't put ourselves in the place of the white Asian that was being expelled, and he was representing them in a novel in that sense. So it's a panoramic, can we discuss this book as a panorama? Can we just, Do you want to start with that?
So the book, as you rightly said, a panorama, it gives a picture of Africa everywhere, and it also gives a picture of...
You don't have to agree with me. If you think that what I said was rubbish...
I understand. So that it gives a picture of Africa as being everywhere. Then it also gives a picture of Africa as a continent that still needs to be understood by the people themselves. Now, as a writer, Abel realizes that there is so much that we have not learned from history. And there is so much that history has done. So there is a kind of margin between history itself and the people for themselves. Because Sir Kuruma's admonition to him in the text serves as a kind of background to his duty. And I feel that the narrator or protagonist in this text is a small picture of the, let's say, the emergence of new African writers. That we are now in a dispensation where the African writer must understand their history before producing any authentic work. Okay. So it is not therefore African storytelling from it, because we can't say this is a Nigerian work of no. It is something so complex and so significantly placed that it carves for itself an identity as an African writing. So a Nigerian can pick it up, understand what is going on. A Somalian can pick it up, understand what is going on. A Kenyan, an Egyptian, anywhere in Africa where this book is read, the content will resonate with a part of themselves that may have been missed in the process of documenting history. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I like that historical perspective. Does anyone want to ask us any question? Nobody? Okay, so we can go back to... I actually see history in this book, and because the novel is light, you can get a sense of, oh, okay, this is what exactly happened at so and so, just by he introducing a character during a meal, about 5 people are having dinner, and that person comes from Aberdeen, the other one comes from Zimbabwe, and they're having this conversation, and you get a sense of, oh, okay, is that what actually happened in 1972? But you can also, you might not also get it if you are not a reader. Is that a problem? Do you have that kind of challenge? Navigating when you find some information, in the book, you've got to, if you were not privy to some kind of a background, do you have, and because you are very critical about, characters themselves, does Abel appeal to you as a rounded character when you talk about that historical thing? Tell us about what you think about Abel.
Okay, so it's the sense of survival that Africans have everywhere they find themselves in the world. So this also somehow relates to history with politics and what politics stands for, how that this person is in power, the person does the same thing, and then another person gets into power. Maybe that person also criticizes those that were there, but you also get there and you are repeating the same history, right? So it's interwoven, it's interconnected, it keeps happening, right? And it's I don't want to say it's an African trend, but you would find it in every African country. Like anybody, like he said, anybody can easily pick this book and resonate with it. For example, when Abel heard something that his friend Yakuba said, and he was like, why would this person say such a thing? But then he has to understand that, oh, this person is now in a political position, so he has to do what works for him. So he has to be, in a way, selfish and work things out the way it's going to work out for him. So we cannot strike it out that history would still not repeat itself. We're Africans. I think we're prone to keep repeating the same pattern.
So what's your take on Abel as a character? Is he an interesting character? Is he rounded? Yes. Is he a
Yes,
damaged, you know.
Abel is an interesting character because he tends to find an alternative to whatever it is that happens to him. So even after he lost his mentor, that of course shook him, but it didn't weigh him down. It still wanted to do more. So I love his character actually because he had to blend into things. He had to move on with whatever it is that he had. So when going back through Sakurma wasn't working for him, what next? The next thing is Yakuba. And then even after that didn't work for a while, he had to leverage on Jilo, who in a way reconnected him back to his African roots, you know, bringing him back home and all of that. So I feel like the character was actually a good one.
So, give us a sense of what, because I think that Jilo was a very significant character in that novel. Give us a sense of what you think about Jilo and what you think he was trying to do with that.
Okay, but before I mention Jilo, let me add to what she has said. So if I would analyze the characterization of Abel in that text, I think that character, he himself is like a symbol of the meeting point between adaptation and survival. Because we see a character who is adapting, and we see a character who is surviving. So let us leave it there. Because the movement, or let's say the travel we have in the text is significant. There is a dimension of Harlem here. There is mention, and I marked it as symbolic. It may have passed as just a kind of setting, but it is an allusion. So we have that this text even resonates with Black Americans anywhere they find themselves. Now, coming to Jilo, that character, so significant. She has a short life. And the one thing about that Jilo is how her life is a representation of blackness in the sense of tradition and religion. We see someone who is in a wedlock. There is something he does here that is from Yoruba culture. So one even needs to understand. That's why I said earlier on that the new historicist given in this text will propel the reader to first understand culture. Therefore, one cannot truly get the whole context of this novel without understanding the cultures that have been mentioned. So, not to derail from the point, the culture of Gbamiurami in Yoruba has been used there. Gbamiurami, the medicine man, says, I will heal this girl, but she will marry me. But the girl grows up and keeps escaping, trying to escape that tradition. And at the end of the day, she dies.
You think that it was the spirit that took her?
Yeah, I think it is the spirit. Why? Realism. The realism and the verisimilitude. So, Jilo is a realistic character. It goes beyond fiction. It's a realistic character.
Let's ask the author. Akin, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
What do you? Is it those village people that did something to Jilo?
Well, I let the reader decide that. I don't know. I don't personally, I don't want to say I don't believe in things like that, but that was not, I think that, she's a sickly person. I mean, if you know the family history, the family was plagued with the old notion of what we call abiku, if you remember very well, because in fact the name Jilo is a name given to female who are considered abiku in Sierra Leonean culture, or in part of Sierra Leone, so to speak. And so, but she's a medical doctor, and then she was getting better, and she became a fairly successful person. I think for me as a writer, as the author of this novel, what I was trying to do at that moment was to actually make sure that this extremely interesting character, Jilo, is not heartbroken or by Abel, who has a history of being very cold-hearted, especially when he thinks that he needs to move on. And to me, so it seems it was an authorial decision on my part to make sure that that doesn't happen. And the novel has to go forward anyway. So at some point, that's the way I can explain Jilo's death. But I grant that other readers will come. In fact, I wasn't even thinking of Bami Orami, which Shegu mentioned now when I was doing that. It was essentially, I mean, it's there in many African cultures, of course. And so that was I just made a novel, made a decision as a writer to let the novel move on, irrespective of what maybe by death or, in fact, I would rather that she was the one who break his heart rather than the other way, but it doesn't happen that way.
Thank you very much. So there's also the fact that, of course, we move beyond this. I just want to point it out. There's a way that you capture information in the novel. It's just here and there. The precocious nature of Abel, as at age 18 or 19, he was thinking like this. My life, I was beginning to discover, will be made out of books. Not the kind he wrote, not the kind Sakuroma wrote, his mentor. Long poems about his people who had lived in the same place for centuries, resisting, accommodating, overcoming invasions. But stories of people and things in motion, bodies and organisms which had nowhere to go but could not afford, will not be allowed to stay put. That's the kind of book, it resolved that. That's the kind of book that he wanted to write. And he was also that sort of person, Anyway, so let's go to, you mentioned something about what you thought was the post-colonial nature of this work. How, do you think that the African novel essentially is a post-colonial work, that you can't escape it because we are in the post-colony anyway? Is that it? Do we have to be defined?
I like that word, defined, because I was going to say, when you say post-colonial, we also need to understand that post-colonialism or post-coloniality, depending on which angle one is coming from, has certain elements. And elements of post-colonial discussion, one of the prominent elements of post-colonial discussion is politics. So disenchantment with the political class. But in this text, we see that those elements which the reader will discover, those elements have been treated proportionately. Politics, the individual, society at large. So those elements of post-colonial discussion have been given proportionate attempts, to cover how the African society is structured. And so when we examine the case of post-coloniality in this text, we still come to terms with the obligation of the African writer. That the obligation of the African writer is not to take a streamlined view of history or society, but to capture it in the proper context of humanity, to cover it in the proper context of the shortcomings of the new dispensation. Because the writer aptly uses one element of novelty, new dispensation, towards the end of the text, which I also marked, the psychoanalysis of guarding, the use of kitten, then one that is strikingly significant. But, it takes someone who is really studying the text, not just reading in passing, to get that, which is the psychoanalysis of hunger. So hungry. Then the rain is also going to fall. And the cloud so pregnant with the rain, and he is also very hungry. And then the chapter ends there, that just to satisfy that hunger, to sate his hunger, he goes out into the rain, he dares the oddity of that weather. So that brings it to the fact that the African writer, when I suppose now that the African writer, when addressing post-colonialism or post-coloniality, must have a balanced view of the elements of post-colonial issues.
When you read, I mean, you won the review prize based on your reading of a certain work of Ngugi. Does Ngugi make this kind of equal proportion the way Akin does? I mean, there are two different generations.
Okay, I think that question is sensitive in that I said it earlier on that while those pioneer writers emphasized ideological conquest, this text is emphasizing ideological displacement. So, in a way, the pioneer writers, I'll take Ngugi as a class, then Adesokan as a class. Remember I've said that this text has given us a kind of template to the reimagination of society in African literature. All right. So I would say that Ngugi also does that, but it takes someone who is reading with a theoretical mind to get that. So because a good work of literature is unfinished. So we can't say that those pioneer writers did not do that. They may have done that in passing, and it is our duty as the duty of writers to take their cue from those pioneer writers and merge it with what is happening now.
Thank you very much. You can clap for him. I mean, just we need to test this your theory. We will ask the author what he thinks. But let me ask Oyinda about this particular character that keeps on popping up and veering off the book, which is Yakuba. Is Yakuba, I mean, you know, I mean, I don't want to use the word, I'm trying to run away from, you know, insisting that a character is good or bad or something. But in terms of, you know, being an accomplished character in the novel, what's your take on Yakuba, and what's your take on violence? You know, because you did mention coups and co in your review, but you know, things happen in Mende, and they are not necessarily as horrible as the way, and they happened around that same time, the late 60s. But they are not necessarily the way they happen in the rest of the continent. What's your take on Yakuba, and what's your take on the setting of, you know, Mende as a political space?
Okay, so Yakuba is I would say he's a man of himself. He was, I don't want to use the word selfish here, but he just had himself in mind. So whatever I had to do, whoever I had to relate with, he had to, of course, think of himself. For example, when he had a conversation. Is that
like transactional or not really?
Not really. I wouldn't say transactional, but he just wanted to do whatever works for him, no matter who's on the line. Because I feel like Abel was his best friend, right? So he really didn't have to twist whatever discussion he had with him. But he projected a different thing to the media. I can't really remember what the exact issue was, but he projected a different thing to the media, whereby when Abel got to hear about it, he sort of wondered why his so-called best friend would do something like that, right? And for the coup that I mentioned, you know, in as much as we clamor for change, we want something different, we want something good, when we actually have those people in power that are trying to do those good things, we'll still have some people who are not in total support of those things, right? So they will try their possible best or their best possible to make sure that they disrupt whatever it is that that person is trying to do, right? So Sir Nkrumah obviously wanted a change, and then it so happened that one thing led to another thing, and he was killed. Not that he died, he was killed. Right, so I sort of linked it to Ken Saro-Wiwa and I think MK Abiola in my review, right? Because you have people that want the best for their country, they want the best for their city, they want the best for the society. But as much as you have that crowd, you still have some set of people who reap from the bad things going on, the corruption going on, and all of that. So, Yakuba was just a man for himself for me. He was just after himself.
And is neither good nor bad.
He was just for himself. So I don't want to say it. You know, in life, there are times when you actually have to not care about others and just care about yourself. But it wasn't really that situation, because he could actually have maybe done the right thing and things would still be fine. But he just decided to go his own way. He just decided to do whatever he did just for himself alone, without caring about the relationship he had with his best friend.
Thank you. You don't have any. Okay, you read. Yeah. Let me read where the author gave us a sense of the ruthlessness of this character called Abel. I was born on a rainy afternoon inside a ship trolling the international waters several leagues northwest of the Gulf of Aden. My father had taken his heavily pregnant wife to the harbor early that Wednesday morning after hearing of planned attacks on the Bantu community in Mogadishu, and he had purchased the passage at an exorbitant price. Then he returned to the house of a friend who owed him a lot of money and had promised to pay up the same day. That man didn't pay up, of course. After several hours, now out of harm's way, the ship's captain received reports from the lower cabin that a woman was in labor. That was my mother. And the labor was on my behalf, on a ship practically adrift on high seas. Child of native strangers in flight from a home that was not a home. Native of that most fluid of borders, the proverbial international waters. We arrived in Italy as refugees, guests of the Caritas, where we lodged for a month until my father finally joined us. So that's the sense of how Abel came to be. So now let's talk about the kind of, were we given any sense of the kind of books that Abel wrote? People mentioned them during those lunches, and but you are the one who likes to, put Abel in some kind of a notion of whether he's political and do you want to give us a sense of what's your interpretation?
So the question is about his novels or the works?
The kind of work that he did.
Okay, so the novels.
Does that come out in the novel to you?
Yes, it does come out, because you said something earlier on that Abel here is a precocious character. I agree with that. Someone who is so curious about himself and his people, curious about the continent. At that young age, he sees Sir Koroma as a role model, and he begins to pattern his life after that line, to be like Sir Koroma, who is a custodian of history and the ideal. Now, what I would say about the novels coming out in the text is that they truly appeal to the naturalist ideology. The naturalism which posits that an organism is affected by the environment and the gene, something about environment and their gene. Yeah, that's the family line, something like that. Lineage or family line and environment. So his novels are an approach to document how the writer's environment, an African's environment, right, is a portrait of what you are going through, and that the imagination of society is a work of evolution. So each novel published at different periods, so significant. And at every roundtable discussion, he always finds something significant about what he has said and the experience of the discussants.
Now, there's an African American character in this novel. You don't remember, but you remember one ambassador type, you know, and it seems to get a lot of information even before anybody. Are those kind of people who they call CIA? Is that the work that they do? What at the end of the day, when you evaluate the kind of information that gentleman gives about things, you know, that are happening in Mende, how do you describe that sort of person, you know? I mean, in terms of being a government, you know, I mean, his place in the U.S. system, you know, that will also give us a sense of the kind of games that the author plays in this book.
So, to the best of my knowledge, I think that kind of character, looking at his own disposition to politics and what's going on, I think that kind of person is still one of the things Abel aims to do in that text. I think that kind of person mirrors it so well, in that from that man's perception of the story, Abel realizes that there may be a shortcoming to what we think of ourselves, and there may also be an advantage to it when we compare it with what is happening in another world. So I think that person's opinion that Abel gets to know is also a portrait of the matrix of the two worlds portrayed in the novel, because the novel portrays two distinct worlds: the world of a historian and the world of a writer.
Okay, thank you. We haven't explored how much of a geographical novel this is. We haven't explored how much of a music, you know, I mean, novel this is. And there might not be enough time to do all of those things because we have a panel coming up shortly. But let me read to you some of the things that fascinate me here, that makes me think that, you know, there's a lot of, just as you have history, there's also a lot of geography here. And it's a touristic book. During the Christmas holidays, this is around 1965 now. You have to find that, so you have to look around, and it doesn't say it in the novel, you know. But so you have to tell yourself what was happening in the world around that time. So during the Christmas holidays, when the airy, breezy aura of the Harmattan season made traveling easy, I would drive for days with Jilo along the coast as far east as Calabar in Nigeria. He treats Nigeria, he pretends that he doesn't know Nigeria. Yeah. Going inland in a few places. We might spend a night or two in Lagos, Accra, or Kumasi. But Winneba in Ghana was our preferred stop. The Osagefo was kicked out of power in the interval between visits. That's what gives you an idea that this must be around 1965. But we still had a few friends at the Institute, interesting people from the West Indies and Central Europe who had seen the world and had read just about everything. I reconnected with my old teacher, Etheridge, and no surprises, good old Billy Rand put in an appearance to tape interviews for a film he was making about the slave forts. The weeks between the end of November and the 24th of December were my favorite time of the year. The lodging was cheap, food was plentiful, and there were lots of things to see and talk about. I wrote at night, and after breakfast and a short nap, we sailed south of the Still River Nsube, buying freshwater fish to grill for early dinner. So, as a panoramic walk, how do you, how much of this accomplished is that? And does this book at all give us, do anything about the theme of this festival? It doesn't look like, does it? We're supposed to be discussing change, imagining alternatives. So does it do anything about change, imagining alternatives?
Yes, it does. To me, it does. Remember, I've said the text as a new, published in 2025, it gives us a reimagination of African society generally. So, with respect to the theme of this program, the imagination of alternative will therefore be that we are now in an age where the authenticity of an African writer's work must capture the realism of their history. That is, while we keep looking at issues of post-colonialism, urbanization, and the concomitant issues, we should not evade the question of how our origin, how the portrait of society in its originality is an essential feature. Now, you also mentioned geography, that the work is a geographical work. True, it's a geographical work. It cuts across several spaces around Africa, Egypt, Sierra Leone, and that comes from the name, the food, in fact, elements of culture in the text. So the elements of culture given in the text points to geography, then the setting, the description, everything points to geography. And I think that is so significant. The portrait of geography in the text is so significant because it will give the reader an inkling into how Abel as a character is very much particular about the minority. Because you can't talk about minority from just a surreal point of view. You need to come down to what is happening to them, the issues that affect them. So you said that part that you read alludes to 1965, right? So the description of geography in the text will give the reader a historical consciousness to give proper contextualization to what the writer is doing.
Thank you very much. Let me read another passage where this is about food now. This is page 62, if you have, I think. So I'm going to read two different, there's page 62, very short, and page 107. Cucumber soup, enlivened with periwinkles for appetizer. Fried kenke, boiled cassava, and freshwater catfish in cashew nut sauce. Mango sorbet, honeyed milk curds, and ginger tea for dessert. And port, of course. To my father, a lunch, this was 1958, and this is in Mande town. Mande, yeah. To my father, a lunch or dinner that did not include port as dessert was not complete. Port as essential post-prandial, he will croon. Port, the prime export of Porto, Portugal. The little tumbler dangled from his forefinger, his face lively with the excitement of finding an outlet for his sybaritic yearnings. Okay, so that's around 1958 in Mande. Now, this is in Italy around 1961. The feelings I get, and that's on page 107, if you can find it. We're in church now, this is the Bible. The feelings I associate with breakfast and summer, yes. Late breakfast in summer, even after I have had to accept the reality of what my blood can and cannot tolerate. French toast, scrambled eggs, English muffins, sausages, homemade yogurt, fruit salads, coffee, honey, and grape juice lay spread out on the broad table. Now, so you saw the whole freshwater catfish and cashew nut sauce, all of that in Africa, and you see the so you can see how the author is, playing around, playing games with, and that's what I mean that it's a very panoramic novel. So there's this Denmark part, page 295, set in the mid 1970s. 285 rather. I sensed that it was an active, much patronized place. I ordered a meal which intrigued me by its sheer unseemliness. In this environment, steamed tilapia with okra, sliced potatoes, carrots, peppers, and spinach. All right, so that's Denmark. That is trying to say that he was trying to experiment with African food in Europe. Okay, so this is still Denmark, and this is still mid-1970s. Page 296 this time. I prepared it for a rotisserie, spiced with oregano, minced ginger, onion, peppercorn, and garlic. Abel was entertaining visitors, I mean, most of the information you get in this novel is always around dinner table. Okay, so I prepared it for a rotisserie, spiced with oregano, minced ginger, onion, peppercorn, and garlic. There were baked potatoes for those who could not do without sizable carbs. But I invested more in the salad of baby lettuce, radicchio, and spinach, skipping the feta cheese for fresh apricots and cranberry-flavored almond oil. Professor Adesokan, are you a chef on the? A little bit told me that you cook for your guests a lot. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I always say that anybody who likes to eat should also know how to make food. And of course, as you know, what's going on in the novel is not a replication of my life, because I'm not nowhere near Abel in terms of his history and all of that. But I guess that the idea is that, and I think I said this in an interview that you and I had, that food is a very major aspect of life. And in fact, that's why in most cases and I think Tade Ipadiola mentioned it yesterday, that when he got to the US for the first time, he was in Iowa in the middle of nowhere, and he was trying to figure out the kind of food that he would, because it was his first time. Perhaps, he will be used to eating things like amala, rice, plantain, and all of that, which you couldn't get in the middle of Iowa. So I had to say, okay, go to a Mexican restaurant, you will find beans and rice in their food. So that's one way you can actually try to understand things. Because food is very important, especially for somebody who is always on the move. You have to be used to different culinary or cuisine components of life. And for him also, because he's not married, and when he can, he will eat out, but I also try to suggest there, when he says something like what my blood can and cannot take, that he has food, what we now call dietary restrictions, that, he has allergies. If he eats something, he's probably going to get sick. So he cannot, he has to sort of watch that. So he really cannot eat outside as frequently as he would like, given his lifestyle. But so that actually then imposes other demand on him, which is actually another way to be able to actually make his own food. And so that's why you see him actually talking about food. And I think Shegun mentioned the case about hunger. You need to know some people cannot do without food. Like some people, when they are hungry, they cannot think, and I think it's just, and I know people like that. Like, once it's food, I mean, once they are done eating, then you can listen to them. But the moment when they are hungry, there's nothing you can say. And there's a Yoruba proverb which says something like, uh, hunger and discussion cannot coexist at the same time. So you either have one or the other. And once you solve the problem of hunger, then we can talk. Okay. And then, I mean, there are several expressions like that. And I think that that's why you see him actually being so fascinated about food. But if I may, since you have said we are out of time, I just want to say something in reference to what I think Oyindamola was struggling with about Yakuba earlier on. The word, I think, was maybe opportunist. Maybe that's what you were looking for. You have to correct me if I'm wrong, please. But it's an opportunist in a very focused way, because the part you are talking about is when he publishes a statement that Abel did not remember having made, right? But the point, of course, was at some point, Abel himself was struggling to help him get out of jail. And he wrote something and he gave it to a diplomat from Tanzania. And he thought that was the end of it, that these people were not going to do anything. But politicians, once they see something that's in their own interest, they will use it to the max. And that's what, and Yakuba, trying to get in jail, to get out of jail, trying to actually launch his political career, would do anything. And I think that that's what's going on there. The other point I want to make about this is that, and I said this a bit yesterday also, that some people, I mean, I open, the novel is also about this tension between politics and art, between those who are interested in political power and those who are interested in artistic life. And that's why you have both Abel and Yakuba being two sides of the same coin. They are inseparable. They come to understanding. He saved his life when he was young. He was the best person who actually gave him grounding as a young person, But then when time comes for him now to reap the benefits, he basically does not make any excuses. He goes for what he wants. That's Yakuba. And I think that that's the nature of a politician.
Can we get what the responses to our conversation has been on the, since we are not having
from Oko Owocho, the moderator asked a vital question which I would like to expand a bit beyond the novel in focus of contemporary African literature. Okay, a minute. To the panelists, how does contemporary literature imagine an alternative in terms of ideology, struggle, and importantly, the issue of Pan-Africanism in a fragmented world reeling in pseudo-globalism?
more interested in the so-called idea of the African past, how to really, you know, the phrase he uses is that we need to have a sense of when the rain begin to beat us. And that's a question of dealing with the colonial encounter. And I think that, yes, as one of Segun's early interventions in this was about this discussion about colonialism. There was a bit of that in the novel. But this is the novel more about trying to reimagine not so much the past, which you can do very little about. He actually says at one point that there's nothing I can do with the past. You know, you don't have a choice about who brought you into the world, but you are here now. You are a young person. You've sort of socialized yourself into thinking about the entirety of the African, or if you want, the human world, so to speak. And what do you do with that? And so that really is where it's a more forward-looking, but not in a sociological sense of really looking forward to but to sort of present a different way of looking at the very essence of what constitutes the African world. I mean, you think that, you know, a Nigerian novel or a novel by a Nigerian will be set in Lagos or will evoke a particular place, even if it's set in a fictional African country like Abazon for Achebe's Artists of the Savannah, that it will mirror Nigeria. This is not that kind of novel. This is a novel, and I want to sort of make this point that this is a novel that actually imagines the entirety of not just African, but the Black world as coexistent, has been together. And that has not, to my mind, been seen a lot in our fiction or in our writing in general. I mean, we talked about Yvonne Adiambo's novel yesterday. That's the kind of orientation, that's the kind of sensibility that this novel tries to promote. And I think that in that sense, yes, it imagines and reimagines, if you want, or imagines an alternative to how to actually think about what constitutes the African or the Black world. And because I don't even think that you can think about the African world in isolation, because it has never been in isolation. African history there was history on the African continent before we encountered Europeans or Arabs, and we've gone beyond that. We are now living with Native Americans. We are now living with Mexicans. We are now living with people from Australia, even if they are not on this continent. Part of us are in those other places, and that's the expansibility of what we call the African world, and I think that that makes sense.
Thank you very much. Is there another one? Okay, you can clap for him. You can, yeah. Is there another one before we now ask the audience to? Is that all? Is that all? Oh, okay. All right. So, all right. So, I'd like for you to respond to, you know, because you already had a take on that, and does it clarify what you're trying to say about? Okay, so you don't need to make an intervention. All right. Yeah, please.
Thank you. So, as he was speaking, I remembered something I wrote down in my reading recently. I can't remember which novel it was that I was reading, but I wrote down something that the politicized interest of the international audience remains a narrative landscape in the analysis of the agony of the victims and survivors of wars and other precarious conditions in circumstances where it has been impossible to exonerate the few for whom such outbreak holds some quantum of lucrative enterprise. So what that tells us is that in the portrait of Pan-Africanism, because the person mentioned Pan-Africanism, and the moment I heard that, I got the idea that nowadays, or in recent times, the way African writers, or at least let me narrow it down to Nigerian writers, the new set of writers that we have in that space now, those who have dominated the literary space, what they try to do, you know, I'm sorry for referencing several. Soyinka said something about history, that the writer does not understand the idea of history. You know, in one of his memoirs, where he references the is he ignorance now? How that the writer does not have that fortitude to bear the duty that history imposes on you. So when you mention Pan-Africanism, we should understand that the new set of African writers or Nigerian writers, they have a new problem. So different strokes for different folks. So what those pioneer writers did, that's, you know, a writer must be true to their dispensation. So these writers are true to their own dispensation, writing about issues of urbanization and all of that. But how that change can come in is what I have said earlier on, that the authenticity of the African writer must be situated in the correlation between history, politics, society. So you do not sidestep one to glorify another. Yeah, I said that.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid that's all we can take for at this. I think we took a long time. I mean, we bored quite a number of people, I'm sure. And some people walked out on us. Well, God day. But we've had a very exciting time here. You want to say something?
Yeah, just one final note on how I ended my review. So for me, the main lesson is clear. When the world offers no home, imagination becomes the alternative. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. That's good.
That's good.
Kehinde, you are a heavy literary man, so do you want to also summarize?
Well, I very much agree with what she said, and I'm expressing my profound gratitude to the writer, Professor Adesokan, for writing this kind of novel. And my final note will be that this novel is an eye-opener for the emergence of writers, the things they need to understand, maybe not do, but at least understand to produce authentic works.
Thank you very much. So, yeah, we're done. Mr. German.
Thank you.
The panel after here. Yes, thank you very much, Prof. I mean, you probably should, I mean.
Let me just say that my publisher is also here.
Oh, okay.
My publisher has been here throughout, and she's online, and she just gave a clap, an applause. And I have to say this, I've said this whenever I have the opportunity, that without her, this novel will not exist the way it does. Because, you know, a writer can write. If you don't have the right editor or the right publisher, then it doesn't become a novel. I mean, we talked about this all the time. And so big ups to Mrs. Azafi Omonduabi for taking on this novel and for championing it every time. Anytime we have to say something about the novel, she's always there and really supporting us. So I think I wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Ben Eluma, right? Okay. That's your panel. We're waiting now for Adaudo Ayamusi. Are you the one? Can you imagine? I've been looking at that forever. She's been here for the last 3 hours, long before we. Thank you very much. That's not how you look on LinkedIn now. Okay, anyway, so yeah, so that's the panel. Let me, no, I have to make a transition. So the entire panel is here.
Well, thank you very much. Let's just take a picture, Chairman. While we look for our compere, he has vanished. Yeah.